Okay, better?
There it is.
All right. So the way that I came about, I'm new to this really, just started this year, but it's been years in the making. And so it's kind of the podcast is really a nexus of all of the advocacy and the work that I've been doing over the last probably 10 years through education advocacy. For 11 years, I've been working with the unemployed. And then, and I'm very engaged in politics, not necessarily partisan politics, but just showing up at the local level to public meetings. And so the name social impact is really a play on words that I started seeing the impact investing network and how the social impact bonds were coming in, not necessarily as the name social impact bond, but they would use, you would see programs coming in at the local level. So I thought, okay, it's affecting education and politics and our commissioner's court, our city council. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do a podcast and talk about all of this because it can be very it gets kind of hairy. And so I'm able to take a complex topic. I've only got 25 minutes. And so I'll just kind of walk you through this. So the Offbeat Business Media Network is actually mostly businesses, small businesses. And so I'm unique in that I don't have a product or a service to sell. I'm sharing a message. But there are most of the hosts of the podcasts at the Offbeat Business Media are small businesses and entrepreneurs. And so why would you want to start a podcast? Really, it's to get your message out there. And your message might be to grow your business, to expand your network and help people to understand what your products are, what your service is, and get that out there so you can educate your customers, you can generate new clients and new business, and open up your business to an audience that may not otherwise know about it. We tend to stay in our silos, and we, if you're in a very kind of niche kind of area or market, you reach a lot of the same people. So in order to expand that, a podcast can grow your reach there. So with the content, I think content is king. And I know exactly what I want to do and what I want to say well in advance of my podcast coming out. I usually write down some ideas that I want to do, and then it just sort of happens. I reach out to people that I think are subject experts, thought leaders, and I have them on and interview them. So thinking about what kind of content you want to put out there, I like to tell, this is a lot of the advice I give to my job seekers is you're either creating or consuming. And so you've got to decide what percentage of time do you want to be consuming, because social media can be a major time sucker. It can be a complete waste of time. It could also be a great tool for being creative and coming up with new content and sharing information and ideas out there. There's a fly in here. I always think that's funny when that happens. So if it lands on me, y'all can tell me. Okay, so who cares? So why would someone want to hear what you have to say? Why is your message something that that people need to hear? Who's your target audience? And these are questions that you ask, of course, for your business. What do they need to know that you've got and you need to share? Why would they want to listen to you? Really reflecting on how you can make it interesting and engaging. For me, it's not so much about the numbers, but I want to make meaningful connections with people, have them understand the issues at the four, or these major issues that I'm covering. I want to reach them and grow that, but I'm not really necessarily looking for mass numbers of people. But if you're trying to grow your business, you definitely want to reach as many people as possible. Figure out where they're hanging out, and this is something that I would also do with my job seekers is you need to figure out where the people who need to know what you can do for them, where are they hanging out, whether it's virtually or in person, certain geographic areas where some industries, you've got the telecom corridor in Richardson. You need to figure out where your audience is, both the virtual world and real world, and figure out what percentage of time you need to spend in both. So with the job seekers, I would say you need to get out of the virtual world, get from out from behind the computer screen and get out there and connect with people. But you do need to be on there applying for jobs and doing that kind of work, usually at night is what I recommend. So during the day when people are out and about, and I understand that through this pandemic, it's been very difficult. It's been frustrating to see how it's affected people just from a mental health perspective and isolation. And so I've been really encouraging people, if they're not at risk, then get out there and get with real people in person and connect with people as much as you can. And then asking yourself, what sets you apart? What makes you unique? And what makes your message different than what other people maybe in the same space are talking about? And identify what that is and stick to that, and really continue to remind yourself what that is. And you'll want to remind your listeners of that as well. Frequency and format is important. So I do 2 podcasts per month. They are audio, not video. And that's quite a bit, because there's a lot that goes into those 2 podcasts. I record them in the same day, back to back. But if you are someone, if this is what you're going to spend a large portion of your time doing, you could have more, weekly shows. And I mean, there are people who put out things every couple of days, which is a lot of work. It's hard to run a business and do something like this. I see it as more of a complementary thing that you would do, a couple times per month. And as far as the format of the podcast, so I have a beginning, middle, and end of my show. Mine is 8 minutes intro, and then we go to break. We have ads and commercials. And then I have 8 minutes in the middle. Well, that's really where we dig into the meat of the issue. And then at the end, I have 10 more minutes to close, finish up whatever we didn't finish in the middle segment. And then the closing, I like to always ask, so as far as being consistent with the format, I always ask, what's the social impact of this issue? And then what are the solutions? Because I don't want to just be running my mouth and complaining about some problem or, social issue that we have. I really want to focus on giving the listener tools, resources, and solutions to whatever the issue may be. Decide if you, and I think I said that before, but just consistency with each episode so that your listener has an expectation and you meet that and they know what to expect with your show. And I think that that's something that they can, it makes your show more polished. Now mine is, you can be a solo act or you can have guests and interviews. Mine, I have a guest on each show. I've only done one where I wanted to speak on blockchain and some of the unintended consequences. So I had already done all the research, and I had my producer, the executive producer, on just so that we could have the dialogue, because I like a more interactive show rather than me just running my mouth. And so that one was a solo deal, but normally I have guests, and I've had 2 guests sometimes, and mostly 1 guest at a time. And I prepare them in advance. We talk about whatever it is that they're the expert on, what issue we want to cover. And so they understand what to expect before they come on the show. Audio versus video. I think video is way more powerful, and video costs more for me to do that. So I'm considering expanding to video down the road, but I wanted to get my feet wet with audio. But with video, you can listen while you're driving. or people can watch if they want to. And I think there are some people that really, they like to sit there and they watch the video, and it's more impactful when they can see people. And so that's something that you can decide if which is better for you. The audio is, I mean, it's a lot easier really, because it's a little more informal, a little less, the guests are a little less nervous when they're talking rather than being filmed. And then the length of time, mine is 25 minutes. It's quick and painless. I think, there are people who will sit there and listen to an hour-long show, and it just depends on, your listener. But mine, you can fast forward through it. So I think it's a way to get a ton of information in a short period of time. And then I can add the supplemental. I do a write-up. I write an article for each podcast so that I can include links, because I'm a big researcher, and I publish articles on LinkedIn. So a lot of times those connect to what I'm saying on the podcast, because I've already done the research over the last few years. I include that on there. Tony, how are we doing? Any questions or anything?
Lynn, I think we're fine.
Okay.
I've got some on the back end, but I'm going to go ahead and let you go ahead and continue.
Okay.
Sorry, Lynn, I was talking to you and I was on mute, so I apologize.
Okay, well, I thought, am I on mute? You can't even hear me?
I was going to say that we have plenty of time, but I wanted you to go back to your last slide, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, sure.
And you talked about audio versus video, and then you have a topic for length. And I don't know, I may not have heard you. Do you have specific advice about length of podcasts?
Oh, yes. I was just saying that if you go on too long, I mean, there are people who have the patience to, I mean, this show is an hour. So, we have people who will engage the whole time. But mine is 25 minutes. It's quick and painless, and we cover a lot. And I think what's nice about it is that it forces me to stay on topic. And you can get real ADD and go off, on all these different tangents. It keeps me on message. It helps me direct the guest and make them stay on message. And because we've talked before the actual show, I know what I'm going to ask them.
Okay, so let me ask you a follow-up, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
So do you pre-record your podcasts and then broadcast them, or do you have live podcasts?
That's a great question. Mine are pre-recorded, so they don't come out for a few weeks. And now if you're one of those that is doing like a news type podcast where you're addressing the issues of the day, you got to have everything in real time and do live shows. And I'm actually considering doing something like that, maybe become the news director of with Offbeat Business Media, where we will have radio happening live, and then I'll hit the high points on what's going on in the news, and then have maybe a weekly show or something like that. But okay, that's in the future. And
so you pre-record it. So obviously that gives you the opportunity to edit the message. Do you do a lot of editing before you broadcast?
Not much editing. I do have an editor, and so we can cut out, if they make a mistake or something when they're introducing themselves or they stumble, we can edit that out, but not much editing really. But it is possible, yes. Okay.
And so what is the ideal length of a pre-recorded show on a certain issue in your mind?
No more than 30 minutes, okay. Maybe 45, but I think an hour. Now, if you have an hour-long show, I think you need to break it up into segments like a lot of these high-profile ones will do, where they know that they have they talk about, they have different formats, even like the radio shows that you'll hear, the main, mainstream radio shows. They usually have segments where they'll go over local news or national news, like that.
And so I don't have a podcast, and I don't know if I ever would, because what puts me off a little bit is it seems like a lot of time commitment. So if you were putting together a 30-minute presentation, mm-hmm. and now you're adept at this, so I'm not talking about a neophyte like me who's trying to figure out how to do it, but if you know what you're doing and you've practiced it and you're pretty confident with your message, et cetera, how much of a time commitment would it be to create a 30-minute podcast in your experience?
I think that there are people this comes naturally to, so they can kind of wing it. I would say I'm one of those people where I don't spend that much time. I spend more time doing the research and being out in the field, so to speak, than I do actually preparing for the show. So a lot of times I'm flying by the seat of my pants. I know generally what I want the outcome to be and what I want to get to the heart of the issue. And I usually know my guests well enough. So it's very easy. But I think other people may struggle with that. So if you're an introvert and doing a podcast, you might need to take a lot more time to research and have everything very structured. And at this minute, you're going to be talking about this. I'm not like that. So I think it depends on the person.
Do you think it's important, Lynn, to use your own voice, or do you think there's a market for hiring somebody to present your podcast for you?
I do have a voiceover or somebody who introduces my show, and he's another podcaster. So I do have somebody else who does the introduction. That's the same. It's a canned intro for every podcast. I don't know that you could also introduce yourself and have it be the same message each time. That's a matter of preference, I think. And it also depends on how big you end up going with your reach. And, sometimes your podcast can be picked up by a larger network and grow from there.
We've got a few questions in the chat which go to somewhat to the mechanics of making this all happen. So I'm going to jump around, not necessarily in which they were posted, but John Mottram's got a couple of questions. And one of them is there affordable editing software available to help you put your podcast together, assuming you can't afford to hire an editor yourself?
Yes. And if you're pretty tech savvy, then that's a great option. It's a much more affordable option. And I could do this for a lot cheaper, but I chose to do the paid deal where I'm paying for a network and I get the resources that come with that, including the editor and all the audio and the tech. Those are experts who are handling that for me. But it's actually pretty easy. You can do a podcast from your home or your office, and there's software out there that's pretty user friendly. And for me, it's more about the network of people and with the media company where I use.
Yeah.
And I can reclaim that cost if I get advertisers and sponsors. I just haven't done that yet.
Okay. And so do you know the names of any software that's out there that John might look into?
No, I don't. Sorry, I have not. I did look into it, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Okay, well, maybe we can do that. And you mentioned earlier, right at the beginning of your presentation, I think you mentioned your producer, right?
Yes.
Your producer. What is the role? And this is another question from John. What is the role of a producer for a podcast?
Well, she's passionate about local businesses and growing local business, and that's the heart of communities. And as we've seen with the pandemic, it's been the largest transfer of wealth in American history. The big box companies got bigger and richer, and the wealthy got wealthier, and the small businesses really suffered, and a lot of them were shuttered and affected by the lockdowns. So she's been really, this is what she's been doing for a number of years, but really trying to grow this media company and get the awareness out there of the small businesses, very much like what you do with the chamber. And she's connected with chambers of commerce. We actually record in Farmers Branch, but she's a Richardson resident.
So do you see the producer more as a sort of a content curator or researcher?
I would say she is more of the connector, business development, finding those companies who need her media resources.
Okay. And Corolla has a question. She said, is Offbeat Media a place where somebody can go and record a podcast?
Yes. And so anyone who's interested I'll have my information at the end, or you can connect with me, but yes.
Okay. And how would one go about doing that? I mean, presumably there's a cost involved, right?
There is a cost involved. It's about $500 a month for 2 shows if you're doing radio. It's more expensive if you're doing video, and it also depends on the frequency. I could do more if I wanted to, and that would increase the cost.
So can you give us an idea? I mean, obviously this will vary from case to case, but you mentioned video is much more expensive. Do you have any estimates of what it would cost in terms of comparison if you wanted to do a video podcast rather than just an oral podcast?
Yes, I would say maybe maybe 3,000 a month.
3,000 for a video?
I think that may be about right. I can't remember.
That's a pretty significant investment, right? So
it is. And so you would have to justify. Now like I said, you can have sponsors and advertisers that'll cover the cost, but you got to generate that. And then if you could figure out you've got to figure out the cost benefit analysis, which I'll talk about later, but depends on how much business you think you can generate from that. For some people, it brings in a ton of clients. Along the lines of Corolla's business, there are quite a few health and wellness and trainers and people who are in kind of more holistic health. They have podcasts and shows that they do. So it does bring in.
Yeah, and we are going to get to monetizing in a moment. So I'm not going to press you further on that right now. But I did have a question. Obviously everybody likes to watch videos, on Facebook. If you don't see a photograph, you don't read the post. I mean, obviously everybody knows the virtue and value of a visual image. But when you're working with an audio only, how do you jazz it up to make people interested long enough to listen for 30 minutes?
That's a great question. We do professional photos of the guest and with me and the guest, and that is a consistent format that I have with every podcast. So you'll see the title, which is a catchy title, draw them in, get them interested. Then there's a picture of us, a horizontal picture, and then I go into the article. But at the top, you have the link to click on the podcast so you can start listening right then. Every episode is the same. Okay. Now it's also shared, and that's on the Offbeat Business Media page, but it's cross-shared on Spotify and other things, Rumble, and so the format looks a little bit different, but there's always a picture of the guests and me. Okay.
And do you have, without going into video, do you have like dynamic images while the podcast is running, just to maintain interest?
No. It's just so interesting. People don't need that.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
So it's like listening to the radio, really.
Yes, basically.
Okay. Well,
they never get bored now, Tony.
I'm sure they don't, Lynn. I'm sure they don't. Let me see. We've got a couple more questions.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another question from John, but I'm going to save that for your next topic because I think it's more pertinent to that. But we've got a question from Hillary Horton, and her question is, do you have any experience with audiograms for Instagram? And if so, how have they performed?
We are doing video, not audiograms on Instagram, but we do use it after the guest, after we've completed the interview. We'll do a little clip where the guest will say, I just was a guest on Social Impact Podcast with Lynn Davenport, and we talked about such and such. And it's just a really quick teaser that we put on Instagram. But no, I've not done the audiogram.
All right. So I know nothing about these podcasts. I didn't even know what a podcast was till last week, but I didn't even know what the word was derived from until about an hour ago. But so I just click on and I listen to it at my leisure. It's not sort of broadcast at a certain time on a certain day. Is that right?
There are those, if you subscribe to a certain podcaster or talent, then you would get alerts for when they have new episodes out.
Oh, okay.
So it depends.
So I'm gonna sort of bleed into your next Larry Fusey for being a Luddite, but that's all right. I don't mind being a Luddite. So, and I lost my train of thought, but if you are, is it better if you're trying to monetize your message, is it better to have a scheduled start time where everybody combines, they all come together, there's a kind of a buzz about it? Is that going to attract sponsors, advertisers, whatever else you're using to generate revenue? Or does it really not matter?
I don't know that it matters for, I would say, and this is a guess, but for those listening and those connected with the chamber, I don't know that would necessarily be a benefit. If I would guess that most would want to monetize their message through advertiser sponsors, and also just growing awareness for what they're doing, which would generate new business, new clients, new revenue.
Okay. Well, I've been kind of holding you up for the last 10 minutes. Why don't I let you get on to your next slide, which is monetizing your message.
Yeah, and some of it we did cover. I mean, as far as the cost benefit analysis, I was slow to, well, I was just reluctant to do the video because when I figured out what that would cost per year, I'm not bringing any revenue in. So that would be, that's a huge chunk of change. So it wasn't beneficial for me to do the video. So, and because I'm not selling a product or a service, then I can't really justify it. Now, like I mentioned before, I could bring in sponsors and I could make money that way, and I could easily cover. I just wasn't able to juggle both at first, and so I could do that down the road. And especially as now my message is getting out there, and I have a larger audience than I did when I started. We did kind of cover this before, if you're outsourcing versus self-producing, and there are a lot of tools out there, and I don't really know a lot of the options, which one of the questions in the chat asked, but it was worthwhile for me to outsource it just so I could focus on the message, the content, and not have to really mess with the back end stuff. Kind of like, a doctor, they need people to help them run the office so they can do what they're best at. And so I knew that would be too much technical stuff for me to deal with. Okay. And then analytics is huge. This is something that I'm going to spend more time on as I go forward because it's been interesting to see where the clicks and the listeners are coming from. Something that it has been really helpful or beneficial to my growing my audience is that I've been in such a diverse, all these different diverse settings. And so because I've been, on Facebook for 10 years and growing the audience there through my education advocacy, local stuff, and then LinkedIn, using that, I've connected with all the job seekers over the 11 years. And so it's a very diverse, all these diverse industries. And then Twitter, I like to say I'm an aggressive tweeter. So I follow a lot of people. I have a lot of people following me. And so I'm able to cross share from all these different platforms. And so my reach has been really broad. And that's been very helpful to the Offbeat Business Media Network. So those who would be starting a podcast that don't really have that groundwork laid, it's going to be a little more difficult for you to reach people. And that's been frustrating for some of the podcasters with our network, is that they're like, well, how do you reach all these people? And I'm like, I've been working on this inadvertently for the last 5 to 10 years. And so it's really, it's it's been great to be able to share and have a very broad reach. And still, even my first podcast I did was on data privacy and education stuff. And that one, my executive producer just said, that one just steadily just continues to be shared. And I'm doing nothing to do that. It's just, somebody sends a text message or an email and they share it, and then they get shared again. And it just keeps going. So that's been exciting to watch. So the analytics are really fun for those who are, kind of data wonky and like that kind of stuff. You can really learn a lot about who your audience is looking at the analytics. So you can tell who's clicking on it, where they found it. Was it through, this platform or that platform?
Okay. And can you get instant feedback on your podcast? Is there a way for people to post comments about it that you immediately get alerted to?
No, other than when I share it on Twitter, I can see comments, replies to it. But no, I don't have any. There are some platforms like Rumble where you can see comments, but no, I haven't really paid that much attention to it. I just I can see comments. So in the Facebook comments or LinkedIn comments, I'll post it there, and you can, people will say, oh, thank you, this is very helpful, or oh, I'm sharing this, or they'll tag people and it's shared that way.
Okay. So Jeffrey, people probably don't want to hear me feeding questions all the time. Is there a scope for inviting questioners to come online and ask their question directly?
Yeah, let's, John has a question down here. Why don't you unmute yourself, John Mottram, and ask your question, please.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. Great presentation. And I'm seriously considering going into the world of podcasts. I'm a CPA with a number of businesses that provide financial services. And I'm sorry if I missed this, but give me an estimated cost for somebody like me to broadcast, say, one podcast a month, 4 to 6 minutes in length over the course of a year. What would be a good budget for me?
One podcast per month. Did you say how long?
4 to 6 minutes.
Oh, 4 to 6 minutes. Oh, that wouldn't cost you much at all. I mean, mine's 25 minutes and I do 2 per month, roughly $500. So I would say you would probably want to produce that. Well, I could connect you with the network and they could give you an idea of whether you should do it on your own or outsource them to do it. But I don't know, with that short, you could probably just do it on your own, I would think. Just make the video, or you're saying audio. You don't want to do video, you just want to do audio?
Yeah, it would just be audio. So I guess you're raising another point then. You're saying that a 4 to 6 minute podcast would be not the kind of traditional length.
You could do SoundCloud, might be perfect for you, because SoundCloud, that's an app and a platform where you can upload a picture. So if you wanted to have the same picture each podcast, you could do that, or you could have a new picture with each one, create an account, and that could be shared very easily. I like that platform for something as quick as 4 to 6 minutes, and it costs, I don't know, it probably doesn't cost very much, if anything. Okay. I'm not sure the cost of SoundCloud. I'm a subscriber to SoundCloud, but I don't know that I've ever uploaded on SoundCloud, so I'm not sure the cost. It's not very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
So it sounds like, Lynn, you really have to develop your audience before you start sending information to them, and that sounds like it could be a long process.
Yes, that's why I was saying I have a huge advantage not planning on it. It just everything just aligned perfectly. But there are people who are thought leaders and they have a huge network of people. I mean, like Corolla, if you wanted to start a podcast, 1 million people, and so you've already got an audience. It's just if you're trying to reach new people to bring them in, that would take some work, and you'll have to figure out how to expand that reach.
Yeah, and are there people out there, I don't know if this is the right word, that like aggregators, they have their own audience. They have a certain theme that they like to push on series of themes. Can you go to somebody and say, hey, could you promote my podcast through your network? Does that happen?
Yes, it does. So you'll have people, I've been on other people's shows and had them on my show. And so you've got that cross sharing and a little different audience. And so, yes, that definitely happens.
Okay.
There's like tomorrow I'm interviewing someone who has a podcast on dyslexia, and I've been on his show, and so he's coming on mine, and we're actually going to talk about data privacy because he's kind of a guru on that, but student data and data privacy.
Interesting. We had a question from Benny Wright, and he's not somewhere where he can actually ask the question himself, so I'll ask it for him. He said, how often is too often for a podcast that centers around your business or your expertise in your industry?
Yeah, you don't want to spam people and harass them and be constantly like, look at me, look at me, look at me. I think that's a careful dance that you have to do, because you want to be relevant, you want to be visible, but you don't want to harass them, because then they'll just mute you and they'll ignore you. You want them to want to hear what you have to say. You want to entice them. What is she up to again? What is she going to say this time? That's there's a level of enticement.
Yeah, and that sort of ties into a sub question that John had earlier, where he said, is it a valid objective of a podcast to drive potential clients to a website? And I would have thought the answer is yes, but I can see from what you've just said that you've got to be tactical or strategic about how you do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's difficult. I think what you find, ego is big out there in this this world of podcasting. And so, it's important for me to check my ego at the door. I really, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when you have a podcast or, I'm watching somebody be interviewed and I'm interested in who they're interviewing. And then the interviewer makes it all about them and they talk the whole time and they don't let the guest talk, or they ask a question that's so loaded with, and they never get to the real meat of the question. And then the guest is kind of like, okay, how do I tackle that? How do I answer that? Because there's so many layers to it. I think that there are a lot of egos out there in this space, and they like to hear themselves talk.
Hey,
Okay.
Lynn, I have a question, and I know we're coming up on 1 o'clock, so I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes.
Mm-hmm.
I've been listening, and thank you so much for the great information and the great presentation. In your estimation, and we're, the subject matter we're talking about is how to, use a podcast to benefit yourself, basically, as far as a business or an entity, an individual, that sort of thing. But in your estimation, what is the biggest difference between podcasting and producing the same sort of thing on YouTube, for instance? It seems to me like there's a lot of similarity in your, obviously the equipment, if you're doing video and that sort of thing. It seems to me that there's, the only thing that might really be a difference is you have the video audio option on a podcast. What is the difference between that and doing, something on YouTube with a channel?
Yeah, now, so as far as monetizing, and I hadn't gone into that really, and it's not something I'm an expert in, but I know that there are those who use YouTube, and the more it's shared, and I think they can pay, and then that grows the network, or it grows the shares exponentially. Kind of like LinkedIn does that too, where you pay a premium and then you get a broader reach and more access. I would say, like, for me, the value in using the network that I chose with Offbeat Business Media was that it wasn't just about me and my podcast. It really was about connecting. And I saw the benefit too of just knowing what other businesses are out there and really being able to support. And I lift up those other businesses too. And we comment on each other's podcasts and say, you know, oh, this is very helpful, or that was very helpful. That all boosts your algorithms too. And so having a broader network, and we all have nothing in common. I mean, as far as our industries and what we do necessarily, everything's very different, but we learn from each other. And so I think that's there's a benefit there that is a little bit different than if you're just, you know, doing, I mean, you could live anywhere or broadcast from anywhere and load it up to YouTube or Spotify or now Rockfin and some of these other ones, they pay you. That's a whole other can of worms that I don't really know much about. But there's cryptocurrency involved with some of those, which is a whole other thing. So,
well, Lynn, I'm gonna invite one more final question because we're running out of time. And Hillary Horton, if she's still there, she used a term, an acronym that means nothing to me. So I was going to ask Hillary if she could unmute and ask her question. Maybe she's not. Oh, there she is.
Sorry. Yeah, I wasn't prepared to unmute. Yeah, so I'm just curious about your RSS feed, and if you could share some best practices on how podcasters use their RSS feeds to like get on the different platforms and all the different things that you can do with that. I just think there's so far, people can go so far with that. And I'm curious what advice you can offer.
Yes. Well, okay. So I've had to have a bit of a crash course in this because I don't really focus on that much because I let my executive producer do that. So she knows, so I'll submit a title that I think is good for the podcast and for the article, but she will change it depending on how that RSS feed is found in the keywords. And so I don't fully understand that. Maybe somebody on here probably knows that more. But that is a thing. I mean, that is an important piece of sharing and reaching and being found. So if somebody goes in and types social impact Lynn Davenport, you want it to bring them to the right spot, or certain keywords in the title. And that's about the extent of what I know about that. But that is a very good question because the media experts know the tricks of that, and I don't.
So if you're really serious about having a successful podcast, that may be something you want to invest in, somebody that can help you position your podcast such that it is going to get noticed and people are going to want to see it, right?
Yes, because I was questioning in the beginning. I was like, well, I don't like that title. And she's like, no, you got to trust me because this is how it works. And I'm like, okay, I trust you.
All right. So rely on the experts. I think we're going to have to draw it to a close. Lynn, thank you so much for all this helpful information. I know it's whet my appetite. And I know that John is raring to go with his audio podcast. So I'm looking forward to listening to that. Lynn is going to stick around for a few minutes afterwards. We normally keep the line open for 15, 20 minutes where people can just have more of an informal chit chat and networking, and she will stay on for a little bit to talk. So if you have some questions that weren't answered, feel free to ask those later. Just before we go, I just want to recap for you this series of seminars that Corolla has put together. It's been a fantastic summer cornucopia of information by Corolla, June, July, and August now, 6 parts. We had the social media, general sort of marketing on social media by Ashton Brown, and Corolla was the moderator of that. Then we had Facebook and Instagram with several people, Karen Chrisman, Kelly Christensen, and Kaylee Roberts, a lot of K's there. And Benny Wright, who was on earlier, moderated that. Larry Fusey moderated number 3, which was about LinkedIn with Debbie Saviano. And then we did YouTube. That was section 4 with Roger Wakefield, and Jonathan Kang was the moderator. And then we had Clubhouse and TikTok a couple of weeks ago. And Troy Andrews, a member of our IN, and Victoria Jameson presented that. And I don't know who the moderator was because I know Gary had to pull out at the last second. And then, of course, we've got today with Lynn Davenport on podcast. So that's a lot of ground we've covered, and everything has been recorded and can be viewed on the North Dallas Chamber YouTube channel. So if you want to look back on that, it's a great body of information. Go back and look at it. And so thank you, Corolla, for putting that all together. Right before we go, I wanted to thank Larry Fusey, who is the chairman of our business toolbox committee and makes all this good stuff happen. Thank you, Larry. Do you have anything you want to say before we close, Larry?
You know, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here today. Thank you for Corolla, like you mentioned, for putting this series on and bringing this to our committee. And that's exactly what our committee does, is we talk about different ideas that we think are going to be beneficial to the small business community and the business community at large, and try and put out information that's going to be valuable to them, their clients, their prospective employees, whoever they're trying to reach. And Lynn, we appreciate you spending your time today to help us learn more about podcasts. You know, some of us heard about it before this week, but others are still learning, and that's exactly what we're here for, is to help others learn exactly how, you know, they can make their business like they need to, they want to, and what are the best ways for them to communicate out there to get that information that they need. So thank you so much for sharing this. We greatly appreciate your time and your support.